All right, hello, Honors 110. So to carry on with our identity unit, we had three separate readings for today. For the Cisneros, I imagine this may have seemed familiar to some folks. I know some folks read this in high school or sometimes even earlier in their educational careers. Sandra Cisneros is The House on Mango Street. And so this is an excerpt from that, My Name. So with this, this piece, I actually didn't intend for us to discuss the piece itself in a super literal or in-depth way where I'm going to lead us to specific quotes and so on and so forth. More so for this one, I just wanted to kind of use it as a starting place in thinking about some kind of core elements of identity and how our experiences kind of inform those things. So with that, I'm providing a writing prompt below that's a series of paragraphs that I invite you to engage with and to put down in the discussion. It's a little more writing than I typically would ask people to do in the discussion, but I think it's actually kind of a really revealing exercise and just sort of interesting to do. So please see below for the prompt that I'm going to give you to write about that. Sometimes this brings up relatively personal stuff or otherwise people just don't feel like sharing. So rest assured, you can still participate in the other parts of the discussion if you prefer not to share your free write based on the prompt. But if you do want to include it, I'd always love to see those. I think they can create some really good discussion among you and your classmates. Otherwise, please feel free to include notes from that reading specifically as well if you want to get into it in that thread of the discussion. But otherwise, looking at our other two selections for today, I wanted to go to the Butler piece first. So Octavia Butler, I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with her outside of what's assigned here. She's, among other things, famous for writing about race in particular, but through a lens of science fiction and more speculative fiction and things along those lines. And so with that, this piece, one thing I should emphasize, I think hopefully folks have recognized this already, but it is fiction. So if you're worried about DGD, rest assured it is a fictional disorder, though it is developed out of some kind of a combination of factors from real ailments that people have. So for this piece, I want to focus on bigger picture kind of stuff. So I wanted to kind of look at first just the title of the piece, The Evening and the Morning and the Night. It's a bit of an unusual title. First of all, it's got that repetition of and the. So grammatically, it's actually not correct. In addition to that, the evening and the morning and the night is out of order, right? Because ordinarily we would have the evening, the night, the morning if we were going in order, or maybe the morning, the evening, the night. So having the evening and the morning and the night, again, it's just out of kind of chronological order of how we typically think of a day. So I'm just curious about thoughts on this title and why Butler may have chosen this. But to get to some of those more bigger picture kind of issues I was referencing, Butler introduces all kinds of moral quandaries here. She brings up on page 480 the topic of sterilization, as in should people with DGD just be sterilized given it's a genetic disorder. There's the question of medical school admissions on 481 and this topic of given if someone has this disease, should they be eligible to kind of be in medical school, knowing they have so much shorter of a life expectancy, knowing the possibility that they're going to become so dangerous to themselves and others? Is that even a good idea? Is that a right that they should have the same as everyone else? Related to that, there's the broader question of stripping people of rights if they might be a danger to themselves or others, and this idea of isolating people versus supporting people, and how the experience of people with DGD kind of looks different in the different facilities that we see over the course of this story. So all of these points I think are pretty rich for just kind of consideration and kind of thinking what kind of this fictional disease kind of exposes about our own thought process around things. Another big question I think this leads to is the level of responsibility that someone has. If they are uniquely kind of suited to help or to solve a problem, is it their responsibility to see that through? We see our protagonist in this story ultimately being kind of informed that she is uniquely equipped given her gender, given that she has DGD, to be able to help in the kind of facility like Dilge that we see at the end. And that she should get medical training to kind of support that. Is that her responsibility? Is that something that she should feel like she has to do or not? Right? I think it itself is kind of an interesting quandary kind of related to identity. And then the last big thing I want to get to with this piece is just if we, think about DGD as a symbol for something, because again, it's a fictional disease. Butler has this history of using these fictional elements in service of getting at very real ideas. So one piece of this is that given Butler's identity, given the topics that she tends to be concerned with in her work, I have a hard time not thinking about race in the context of this piece. And in her publishing, this story came out, let me make sure I'm getting the date right, 1991. So not to say this was sort of our darkest time historically around race relations, but it was in a different place than where it's gotten to in a more modern era, although some might debate that. But nonetheless, I think that there is something there that we might read into Butler kind of reading as kind of commentary on race, commentary on how people are perceived as dangerous or inferior in some ways and therefore treated differently, allowed different opportunities. That seems like a part of this project to me. Reading this from a lens of, in the 2020s, I can't help but thinking about this piece from a perspective of neurodivergence as well. We have these people who are sort of, misunderstood, assumed to be dangerous, assumed to be less capable of things. But when they're put in a position to succeed, have this kind of unique ability to really concentrate and actually like do work at a more accelerated rate that we see at Dilge. And so again, that kind of leads me to a place of, thinking about things like autism and kind of our evolving understanding of that. And so in any event, I'll pose that as a question in addition to kind of, my rambling about it of just, what we ultimately think the DGD might represent here, how we sort of understand it. There's certainly quite a few other lenses I've had students apply in the past as well. So feel free to shoot in other directions as well with that. But okay, with all of that said, let me go ahead and turn to the Jane poems here as well. So to give some background context with these are all poems that Nelson wrote about her dead aunt Jane, who passed away before she was born, and in fact was murdered, quite frankly. And so with that, it's kind of a piece of family lore. And so the way that she writes these poems, there's always a mix of sort of her investigating sort of this family mystery, her processing this kind of unusual grief for someone who she never actually personally got to know, but probably would have been important to her life had she been there. So with that, with poetry, I find it's often helpful to actually just go ahead and read the poems aloud. Because just in rereading them and hearing them and discussing them a little more granularly, we kind of unlock some things that we might not otherwise. So I'm just going to kind of go through the poems that I assigned here, starting with The Librarian. So when I tell my mother I'm going to Michigan to trace the end of Jane's life, she surprises me, says she wants to go with me, says it's about time. As we're planning the details of our trip, she repeatedly insists, I don't want you to get obsessed with this. I dream I'm in the library, doing research on the Manson family. I try not to let anyone see me, but the librarian is on to me. When she confronts me, I desperately try to explain that it's part of a larger project. It's not just about the Manson family. So for this one, just to break this down a little bit, I want to especially focus on that one singular line where it says, I don't want you to get obsessed with this. Those of you who studied with me for Honors 100 and some of my peers do very similar things. One of the things we kind of point out with an artifact like this poem is that we look for moments of intensity, moments when things are different, anomalies. I don't want you obsessed with this. This one line, it's the only one that's not a couplet in this poem. It's the only one that's fully italicized. I think Nelson is calling our attention there. In the mother saying, I don't want you to get obsessed with this, there's some implication there to me that maybe Nelson has a tendency to get obsessed with things to the point that her mother is concerned about it. And so I just wanted to kind of, float that notion there. But in addition to that, in the very next lines, she dreams she's in the library doing research on the Manson family. When you dream about this, and then beyond that, she's paranoid within this dream that the librarian is watching her. She's already obsessed. Like it's already kind of too late. So I think this is just kind of telling you about Nelson's personality. And then this last part, it's not just about the Manson family. The choice to use just, right? Some of you may have heard this before. Just is kind of a word in professional writing, at least we typically steer people away from just because it's usually not necessary. And so Nelson's choice to include just in this really tight poem here suggests to me that it's a very purposeful choice, which says it's not just about the Manson family. It's suggesting it kind of is about the Manson family. Like it's not just about that, but that means it is sort of about that. And I expect many people probably have some familiarity with the Manson family. I'm no expert, but they were a cult under Charles Manson, responsible for some, a lot of kind of problematic stuff, including some murders. And so with that, it's a sub-thread of the book, Jane, that these poems come from, that the timeline lines up. It's possible this had to do with the Manson family. I believe the conclusion is that it wasn't actually, but that's one thread that Nelson was pursuing. But okay, carrying on from here though, let me read the next poem, A Trip Back. So our plan to meet in Chicago, fly together to Grand Rapids, then rent a car to Ann Arbor. But huge thunderstorms strand me all day at LaGuardia. Did you think it was going to be easy? I can hear Jane say. There's no way to get in touch with my mother, so when I don't arrive at the gate, she goes on without me. Stays the night in Muskegon with her father. When we finally talk on the phone, I tell her this whole trip feels fatally flawed, and some God's telling us not to inquire further. But I go back to the airplane at dawn, back to Chicago, okay, then board a little propeller plane to take the rest of the way. I watch the woman I take to be our flight attendant as she pulls in and secures the door. I'm shocked when she climbs into the cockpit. I've never flown with a female pilot before. Once we're airborne, everyone moves to sit by the windows, but I stay in seat 1A. From here, I can see all the controls, how simple they are, and how she uses them. So a bunch we could talk about with this poem. I want to specifically focus on sort of the second half of this poem, and particularly when Nelson sees the female pilot here. She calls attention to it, I think, in part because even to this day, the pilots of commercial airplanes, that's a very male-dominated industry. But so it just, she notices this, it stands out to her, and she's paying attention to how this woman kind of manipulates all the controls and how she is in control. And so I think all of this kind of speaks to part of this project being about womanhood, about her female identity, about the fact that her Aunt Jane was a woman who, fell victim to this crime, and now she's a woman trying to put the pieces together of everything. And in observing this pilot, I think it's sort of a symbolic moment of seeing a woman in control, and that kind of empowering Nelson in its own way. But okay, I'm going to read the last poem I gave you all here in the movie version. I am chic, smart, and ambitious, a young CIA agent who likes to run alone in the woods. A city slicker, I come to a small town and unintentionally prod old wounds. I order martinis in the local bar. The regulars don't like me. I learn more and more about her murder, though no one really wants to talk to me. What I don't know is that I'm increasingly in danger. The killer's hot on my trail. One night I come home to find a toothpick shoved in my lock. As I fumble with my keys, he abducts me into a truck, then traps me in a dark cellar where I'm forced to play the cello in a sexy black outfit and confront my feelings about the death of my father. In the end, I kill my captor, even though my backup doesn't arrive on time. In the parting shot, I look safe, happy, and tan, but the audience knows I'll be forever haunted by the crime. So for this poem, I think in some ways it's the weirdest of the poems I've given you, and one of the weirder ones of the book overall. But what it kind of does is the title is in the movie version, so it's just a very literal read of that she's suggesting. If this project of her traveling to kind of track down the history of her aunt, writing these poems, were made into a movie, they're not going to make a movie about someone writing poems, right? They're going to kind of reimagine these things, tweak these things, make it about a CIA agent instead. And it can't just be about kind of self-discovery and kind of unlocking family lore. There has to be a more immediate threat. So she writes the actual killer, abductor, whoever it might be, into the actual script here, so to speak. She adds herself, playing cello in this sexy black outfit. That to me feels like pure movie nonsense, right? Like we didn't necessarily need that. That in there doesn't necessarily make any logical sense. But if there's some excuse to have a woman dressed in a sexy outfit doing something like play the cello or strange, Hollywood's going to find a way to work that in. And so I was just, all of this sort of feels like, again, kind of a dramatized movie version. The very beginning of it kind of riffs off of The Silence of the Lambs, is a thriller movie some of you may have seen that was popular around the time that this was published. So in any event, further getting a kind of this sense of identity that's kind of estranged from the real self, into the more kind of dramatized self, the outside world kind of understanding of someone, in kind of interesting ways. But okay, so I gave you kind of an overview of the poems themselves as I read them to you. I gave you kind of my thoughts. There's plenty more to kind of digest there as well. So I'll invite you to further kind of pick at that or add your own interpretations or questions in the discussion as well. Okay, thanks as always for watching, and I'll catch you next time.